Okay, good morning. My name is Gary Matsuoka, and this is Laguna Hills Nursery in Santa Ana. And this morning's topic is blueberries, which interestingly has become one, if not our most reliable fruiting plant that we sell. So the problem with blueberries that you may come across is that a couple things. You need a special soil. And I don't know anyone else who sells a soil like ours, so you have to make your own or get ours. And the soil the growers used to grow them in is killing them within a few years. So a lot of people have tried blueberries, they turn yellow within a couple years and just fail. They don't like the native soil here, so it's just a pH problem. So blueberries are in the heather family, which includes azaleas, rhododendrons, and they are native to North America, but the blueberries that we're familiar with are east of the Rockies. So from Alaska all the way down to Florida, east of the Rockies, is where the blueberries come from. The blueberries we sell are hybrids, mostly by University of Florida, I would imagine, that were created from the blueberries in their area. And the first blueberries we started carrying were back in the 1970s. So we've been doing this a long time. Now the blueberries are pretty darn good. But again, two things: buy a good plant, and there's very few sources of good blueberry plants. So there's the one good wholesaler that sells directly to some of the retail stores in the area, Dave Wilson. Their plants have become better in the last year or so than in the past. So they're a decent supplier. We used to have another supplier, LA Cook, but they're no longer doing that line of work, so we don't have them anymore. So we've been actually buying our blueberries plants this size in containers, even smaller than that, 2-inch containers, and growing them up to this size for sale in our own soil. So and truthfully, now that we're growing our own blueberries, they're nicer plants. When we get them before, they're, the shipping alone would stress them, so they would drop most of their leaves when we got them this time of year. Now that we grow our own, there's no stress. They look really good. So these are called southern highbush blueberries. So in the U.S., the main ones are in fact, most people who live in the northern states know the northern lowbush blueberries, which grow knee-height or less, cover huge territories around the Great Lakes and the New England states. And then there's the northern highbush, which are more commercial types. Well, we grow the southern highbush blueberries. Yeah, this pin's not working. They're also real famous in the deep south are the rabbit eye blueberries, but we don't do those because they require cross-pollination. It's kind of difficult. Plus, they seem to need at least a little more winter than the southern highbush. Southern highbush, especially the ones from Florida, we've never seen them fail to make a good crop. Have never seen it. So they don't need that much winter. We have the right climate here. We have enough winter. Now Florida's winters definitely must be different than ours because they claim higher numbers on the chill for all their blueberries, which means some of the blueberries that we promote the most would never make fruit here. But they've always done that. So in Florida, they're calculating chill a different way. Now in Florida, the difference in their weather than ours is in Florida, generally 10, 11 months of the year, it's 80 degrees plus. And then they have like 2 weeks that are sub-freezing, 15 degrees, 20 degrees. It stays real cold for a couple weeks, and they get a lot of chill in a couple of weeks, and it's back to just to tropical weather again. So they have real short, intense winters, where we have these real long, extended, cool winters. Not cold, but cool, where it's 30s, 30s not too much lately, but 40s, 50s. For this last year was December all the way into May, it seemed. It was just cool. So anyway, southern highbush blueberries have been our favorites. The soil they like the pH to be below 7, so on the acidic side. Now the soil we grow our blueberries in, and the soil we sell for you to grow them in, is our Gary's Best acid mix fertilized potting soil. So this pretty much is just half peat moss and half volcanic rock, pumice rock. The peat moss creates the acidity, holds the water. The pumice rock allows the soil to breathe so the roots don't rot. Now, when we first started growing blueberries in the 1970s and 80s, the literature said pure peat. Now, pure peat would work if the surrounding soil was gravel or very sandy. But when we tried pure peat in the ground in my yard and watered it, we said, okay, they like a lot of water. We'll put them in our lawn so they get water with the lawn sprinklers. So we had a big hole filled with pure peat, put the blueberries in there, and they did fine for a year. Then we noticed the second year they looked like they were floating. So the hole we had dug was catching the water, and the peat moss had really just changed to sludge or slime. The plants looked okay. We pulled them up, and the roots were like that long, and they're just floating in a little swamp area. So we pulled them out of there, put them in a pot with a different soil. I don't recall back in the 80s what that soil was, and they did okay. They did okay. They weren't wonderful. But then, in those days, I thought blueberries are from Michigan. So we were putting them in the shade in the summer. They were making a few berries, doing okay. We thought, okay, they do okay, but what's so neat about them? Until we started growing them in the 1990s, and we had our own soil for them. We put them in full sun. Then we started getting blueberries that were a good quarter size. And we go, well, this is fantastic. So then we started pushing them more. But the acid mix potting soil, and you can make it out of just peat moss and volcanic rock, pumice rock, 50-50. I mean, you can do, in theory, sand 50-50 with the peat moss. You can do perlite 50-50 with the peat moss, but you need both the water retention, the acidity from the peat moss, and something to allow the soil to breathe permanently. Now, a lot of people have used peat moss and bark, and that's the problem. So many growers grow their blueberries in peat moss and bark. Many of the major growers, the big names you see, peat moss and bark, they sell you the plants. 2 years later, they're yellow. It's just because the bark is not a permanent way to get air to the roots. Bark becomes slime just like peat moss does in time, and then everything just collapses. The roots are gone, plant turns yellow, and it fails. So you have to watch what you use as a soil for blueberries. Now, commercially in California, they don't do this. What they do is they will load up the soil the year before with soil sulfur, just powdered yellow sulfur, and the organisms in the ground, the microscopic organisms feed on sulfur, and their excrement is sulfuric acid. So if you know where you're going to put your blueberries a year ahead of time, you can change the acidity of your soil with soil sulfur. Of course, they also tell me they acidify their tap water, their irrigation water, which I don't know any homeowners who's going to do that. That's a pretty daunting thing to do. I mean, we've done it in our nursery, but in the past, but I don't want to do that again. It's a lot of, you have to have a big mixing tank, several different backflow devices so it doesn't get to the public's water system and all that, and someone's got to check the backflow device. So it's a big hassle to do that part, but that's what the farms do. so they don't have to buy a different soil. They just acidify the soil that they're using and grow the blueberries in that. So there's, different ways you acidify soils. This is a sulfur, this is aluminum sulfate. Now, as far as fertilizing goes, pretty much fruit tree fertilizers will work. If you have the soil done right, your acidity done right with their acid mix, then you use a good fruit tree fertilizer. Now, in our nursery, because we don't have the time to do it all the time, we use a time-release fertilizer like this Osmocote. So this is generally what we use on just about any plant in the nursery. The formula on this is 15-9-12, so highest in nitrogen, next highest in potassium. But it's got 11 of the 13 minerals that plants require. So it's quite good that way, and it lasts 6 months. So for us, we usually sell the plants within 6 months of when we pot them up. So we just have to do this once when we pot them, and then we're good to go. But in the long run, it is good to go organic. And like this organic fruit tree fertilizer 624, those are good numbers for a blueberry also. Mainly nitrogen. The first number is the most important on blueberries. Now, one of the problems we have is longevity. Our acid mix potting soil is pretty acidic, but it doesn't, our tap water is alkaline. It's like pH 8, 8.5. And, the water districts do that on purpose, because if our tap water was acidic, it would dissolve the metal pipes and the metal things that turn the water on and off. So they have to make it alkaline so they don't dissolve the pipes. So that alkaline water feeding into our acid mix over time does make it less acidic, and the blueberry color starts to fade out because of the acidity. So when you see your blueberries start to fade their color, even though you're feeding them, then it's nice to bump up the acidity. You can either use the soil sulfur, this aluminum sulfate. The classic method, or the method I've enjoyed the most, is just getting the old-fashioned fertilizer, ammonium sulfate, which was sold, we still sell it, but it was the original lawn fertilizer, ammonium sulfate, 21% nitrogen. But it is pretty acidic. And you throw that on your blueberries once every few years. It keeps them nice and green because of the, it keeps them acidic enough for the roots to pick up the nutrients better. Now, the other thing about blueberries, they do not handle drought at all. So they're one of the worst plants we've seen as far as, if you have a drought, you can't turn off the water on blueberries. If they drop their leaves ever from drought, what happens, they turn kind of a grayish color, they pick up a little bit of bronze in the leaves, they lose 2/3 of their foliage. That's a sign of drought. It takes them like 2 years, if ever, to recover. It's just not worth it. You just kind of start over. They just don't recover well from drought. So you keep them wet. Now, most people who grow blueberries grow them in pots. So if you grow them in the ground, what you've got to do is make sure the hole is big enough that you can put enough of our acid mix in the hole so that they're not affected by the alkaline soil around them. And we've tried different methods. 1 bag of our acid mix in the ground doesn't seem to be enough. So that's a 1 cubic foot bag. 2 is marginal. If you want to do a good job, you got to go 3 sacks, 3 cubic feet. Make a hole big enough to get 3 cubic feet in there. Then you get pretty much a full-size blueberry 5x5. And truthfully, you can put more than 1 plant in there if you like, just to and keep them smaller, and that's fine. So, but 3 sacks in one big hole seems to work pretty well. And if you have clay soil, it won't drain well. So we recommend if you have clay soil is build up, take the dirt you get out of the hole and make some high walls around it. So this is mostly above soil level. So when you fill it, it's well above soil level, and that'll help it drain better. If you water too much, it'll help it drain away. Now, in theory, if you've got clay soil down here, you have your acid mix here, it'll be a puddle in there for a few minutes, but the clay should absorb all of it. Clay is like blotter paper. It should absorb the extra water, as long as you're not watering all day long. And then plant your blueberries up here, and that's how we do azaleas too. And ferns too. So plant them like that. I mean, some people make a trench and make a whole row of blueberries. They make a blueberry hedge out of them. So as far as spacing goes, for hedge-wise, they say 3 foot up on center between plants. Blueberry plants can grow 5 by 5. A year ago, we had one in here in a half barrel, which is about the same size as this 24-inch box. It was wider than my arm span, so it's like 7-8 foot across, and height-wise, including the container, was like this. So it was about 4.5 foot tall, 7.5 foot wide. It was huge. So that's how big they can get. A friend of mine and I trade plants and materials, and he grew that one for 10 years, then gave it back to me. He says, I need the room for another plant. So we traded and we sold it, but after 10 years it still looked fabulous. So, far as pests goes, we haven't seen any bug pests on them at all. Now they can get scale, and that's from ants, so control the ants in your yard. Don't let the ants overwhelm you. Without the ants around, then we don't see many bugs at all. We haven't really, we've never treated our blueberries for bugs, ever. Haven't seen enough of them to make it worthwhile to treat. So they're good that way. The main problem has been birds. I mean, rats can be a problem too, but birds just love blueberries. Now, the nice thing about blueberries is then the birds don't figure them out for a while. I mean, when the berries are ripening, they're green. The birds can't even see them. They don't notice them. And when the first berries start ripening, the birds still don't notice them. It takes them a while to notice the berries. So you might get 2 or 3 weeks of picking berries before the birds finally notice. Just make sure that's not me. So a lot of people do grow their blueberries under bird netting. One of our customers made a nice frame out of PVC so that they can put the netting over the PVC so it's easier to move off of it. I've had some customers actually grow their blueberries inside of a little structure, a chicken coop, and that's fine too. The other way to keep birds off of your blueberries would be the bird scare tape. Works for about 2 weeks or so. And then the funner one is to put out the scarecrow snake. You blow this up like a beach ball and hang that out there. Birds hate snakes. This one actually works better than the owl. You know, you can buy the scarecrow owls and the falcons and a few other things, and they haven't worked well, like 1 or 2 days for those. But the snake can work easily 2 weeks, 2 at a time. Now, most of the blueberries will have fruit for at least a month, and some go for several months. Usually it's late spring. However, usually they rebloom lightly in the summer and make fruit late summer all the way into winter. So at my house we had 10 blueberry plants in pots about this size. So they weren't huge blueberry plants, about 3 foot or so. And say in October, I can go in my backyard, pick a handful every morning. By November, it was like 5 every morning. And by December, I could find 1 blueberry every morning on 10 plants. So they don't ever stop totally.
Did you prune them from when you got them in the late spring to the November?
I don't know, in my house, we rarely prune the blueberries at all, because I don't have them long enough. So on blueberries, what's neat about them is that they flower and fruit wherever there's a leaf on the branch. And this is a new cane that this plant made this year. You can see it's got leaves all the way from top to bottom. So next spring, this will look like a string of blueberries. Each leaf makes about 3 to 5 blueberries where each leaf is. So it's just a string of blueberries. They don't all ripen at the same time. It's like 1 blueberry in each cluster ripens, 1 per week or so. But it's very impressive looking when they do that. And as the branches get older, they become more woody, so that you have more wood than leaves. And so they say by the 5th year, cut out your oldest branches because they make fewer berries, leave room for more new branches to come through. Now some blueberry varieties don't make many new branches. You're just left with the old branches, so they just make berries at the tips. But we love it when they, the 2nd, 3rd year, like this is on its 2nd year from the time we started them. And that's, I would say, one of its most impressive years, because you usually have a lot of these new canes on the second winter, and very impressive looking plants just lining up with the blueberries on them. So by the 3rd year, you've got close to maximum production. I think it takes about 5 years to get to maximum production, but by the 3rd year, you're pretty close. Because if this is 2nd year, and the plants, when we get them, they're like this big. And 1st year, they're like this. 2nd year, they're like that. And this isn't one of our best plants. We sell our best looking plants during the year. This is one of our last ones from the 2nd year crop. So they get a nice size. Now, generally these 5-gallon buckets are good for a couple years. By middle of next year, it's going to be drying out too fast. So either you clip it to keep it so that it doesn't outgrow this pot, or you start putting in a bigger pot. You can put them in the biggest pot you want immediately, like a half barrel, like a 24-inch box, and that's about as big as they can grow. Or you can keep them in smaller pots and just keep them clipped to the proper size. I mean, we have one customer who would brag about his blueberries. He had 20 pots this big on his patio, each plant about, say, 3 by 2. He was keeping them. And he says, this is the best thing. My grandkids want to come over every weekend to check to see what blueberries are ripening. It's not, not only the May, June crop, but all the way through summer and fall, there'd be blueberries out there. Some, if they looked hard enough, they'd find them. So he really enjoyed his blueberries, or his grandkids did. Well, yeah, you can grow a big blueberry in the pot that's small, but then you got to water it maybe twice a day to keep it wet. So you just trim it so it doesn't get too big. You don't want it to, the worst thing again is drying up. But if you have an automatic drip system that you can turn on several times a day, you can probably get a full-size blueberry in a smaller pot. But it is, the watering is critical on them. So. Yes. No, whenever so they make these canes, and then wherever there's a leaf, they can make new branches. So the 1st year they make this cane, the 2nd year this thing flowers, fruits, branches out, and then every year each leaf on those branches can flower and fruit and leaf out again. So. So they keep filling in. They act kind of like a climbing rose. If you've grown rose climbers, they work the same way. You get these long canes, they branch, flower, and then those branch and flower, and after 5 years or so, they're all woody. Cut them off, let new ones come through.
And when should you cut them off?
Wintertime usually. You can take, it's easier to see. Now most of these blueberries, not all of them, most of the leaves will turn bright red or yellow in December and drop off. And then they usually bloom out. The earliest blueberries start blooming in January. They're real early. Now, the chill, there is, I'm not certain there's a minimum chill requirement on blueberries. It might just be the temperature that they need to wake up, but there must be some, they always list them at needing chill, so there must be a chill on them, but it's very, very low. I mean, the year we had, quote, 50 hours of chill, every single one of the blueberries from Florida still bloomed, seemed even earlier, and made a real good crop. So the real small amount of chill we had, the warmest winters in the last 5-6 years, did not affect them at all. Now it affected some of the blueberries we had from the other states. So Jubilee from Mississippi missed 1 year, didn't bloom at all. And O'Neill from New Jersey missed 6 years in a row, would not make flowers or fruit. So those needed more winter, so they definitely had a chill factor. But the stuff from Florida didn't flinch. They just woke up seemingly earlier and earlier the warmer the winter was. So pretty much blueberries, when they're flowering, leafing, fruiting, water them pretty much daily. Unless you have some kind of pot that, there are self-watering pots that actually hold water. Now most of the organic fertilizers, we generally use them about every 3 months in pots. We mentioned this one once every 6 months. Organics about every season or so. And exposure-wise, full sun. So they're not shade plants. They're from Florida. They're coming out of the marshlands where it's very, very sunny. So. Nancy, someone's ringing a bell. Oh, okay.
You'll be having one of those pretty soon.
Yeah. Okay. Now, as far as pollination goes, all these are self-fertile. One plant will make the normal number of berries, but the research out of University of Florida says you'll get a bigger crop, not number-wise, but berry size-wise, if you cross-pollinate. So it's nice to have at least 2 different kinds of blueberries that bloom about the same time. And then when they cross-pollinate, what happens, they said, is when there's only one blueberry by itself, there may be as few as 1 seed per fruit. And that the number of seeds in the fruit determine the fruit size. So like the South Moon, which can make some really big blueberries, by itself might make something about the size of a dime or normally it's more like penny-sized blueberry. But when it's pollinated, you get things as big as quarters. So very, very impressive. We had 2 or 3 berries earlier this year on plants like this that were quarter-sized blueberries, so really big. For pollination purposes, they should be within about 5 or 6 feet. Now, sometimes hummingbirds do the pollination, and they can fly much, much farther than bees usually do. So if you do have to put them far apart, it's not the end of the world. But if you find your berries are kind of small, you might want to put one closer. But again, still, you'll get the right number of blueberries. They still produce very heavily. But there are, you know, if you get them, and they should be different kinds. You don't want two of the same close together. You want different kinds.
How many different kinds do you use?
We'll list them. Okay, so the variety-wise, I'll list them by their time of harvest. That might make sense. The first one to ripen for us is usually Star. And Star is one of the newer blueberries, developed about 20 years ago. It is one of the major commercial varieties or homeowner varieties in the Deep South. They've come up with a problem in the Deep South with them bunch rot from excessive rain when they're fruiting. We generally don't have that problem here, so we don't worry about that part of it. But they're having some trouble in the Deep South with Star, but here it's been fine. It is usually the first to ripen. It is usually considered one of the best ones, and it does have fairly large berries. They call it Star because if you look at the bottom of a blueberry, it's got the flower remnant, and instead of being round on Star, the old flower petals form a little star on it, very distinctive, so it's kind of neat that way. But so large blueberries, early now, every year it's different. Some years they can start fruiting in late April, but usually it's May sometime. But every year it's different. We never know what's going to happen with these. But Star is usually first. Jewel is right after Star. It overlaps, sometimes just a few days apart. And Jewel is large to very large size blueberries. So these can get quarter size pretty easily. Then you have Misty, and that's a medium to large. Now, I'd have to think that our source of Misty has changed because we used to buy blueberries from a company in Michigan. And the Misties we got from them, their catalog said they were the biggest, and they were big. They're all quarter size when we got them from them. But now our source is Oregon Nursery, and they list them as medium to large, and they definitely are smaller. So I don't know if what's changed on it or not. Now Misty does have a distinctively different colored foliage, more gray, dark gray green. So that's a Misty.
Even the wood, the vines are different.
Yeah, it's different. It's not quite as productive as the other blueberries, so we're not pushing it as much as we used to. But still, you know, if you like variety, it's nice to have it. And then would be South Moon. And I would have to say that one's large to very large also, because our biggest berries this year are on South Moon. Now South Moon in the regional taste test in California is #1. But it's not #1 by far. I mean, I would have to put 2 at Jewel, very, very close to. Now, we're coming to about mid-season now, Emerald. And that one's considered very large. Now, Emerald's the one I've grown the least, because this is one I tried to put in the ground in my house with 1 bag of acid mix and it didn't work. So emerald has never done as good as it should in my own garden. Now I'm growing a lot more in bigger pots now, so we'll see how it does. But it's rated as very large and mid-season, which is mid-June or so. And they do say it's got a long harvest, which is a fault on some farms because they say they have to go out there and pick it at least 4 times. So that means it's well over a month of harvest period. Now, the big 3 in the Deep South were Emerald, Jewel, and Star. Those were the 3 most popular blueberries in the last 20 years being sold to homeowners and farms in that area. South Moon is the best tasting, but it is, compared to the other blueberries, coarse grower. Like you can see, some of these are real fine textured, very coarse. Tends a little more to get root diseases than the other blueberries do, although in our acid mix it's not usually an issue. But if we lose blueberry plants, you know, like we buy in 1,500 blueberry plants, we might lose 3 or 4. It's always South Moon. So it is a little bit weaker than the other blueberries, not hugely weaker, but they don't use it commercially for that reason. But it is number one in the, you know, it is, you eat a South Moon, it's surprisingly, you know, it's got that nice aroma to it that's a little bit, I would say, richer flavored than some of the, or richer smelling than some of the blueberries. And then we have Sunshine Blue. This is the oldest blueberry that we have. I think it was developed in the 1950s or 60s down in Florida. And this is, they say medium, but I'll tell you it's small to medium. And we call it mid to late season, so it'll last into, well, into June, maybe into July even. So this is the Sunshine Blue. You can see the leaves are smaller. The plant is actually smaller too. So instead of growing 5 by 5 like most blueberries does, this grows about 3 by 3 to 4 by 4. So it is a smaller plant. Some people prefer it. Like one gentleman told me he wants all Sunshine Blue blueberries because they mix with his cereal better. So that's one factor. It seems to be very self-fertile. Well, the berries are small anyway. It is smaller berries. So, and not many things bloom as late, although some, this year, Sunshine Bloom bloomed, overlapped the other blueberries. Some years it blooms well after they do. But this year they all bloomed, it seemed, at the same time. Sunshine Blue is also noted for being able to handle the native soil by it without any help. So even if you don't put too much acid mix in the ground, you don't acidify the soil at all, Sunshine Blue seems to handle the higher pHs of our soils quite well. So a lot of people like Sunshine Blue the best. I don't know, I find the berries on the small side. I'd rather have larger berries. Now, Rogers Gardens had always liked Sunshine Blue for a long time. One of the reasons probably is because being so close to the ocean, they don't get enough sunlight until this ripens to get it sweet. The early berries in the middle of June gloom, May gloom, June gloom may not have much flavor. Sunshine Blue ripens into July, it seems, so it probably just tastes better because they have more sunshine at that time. So. Now the last blueberry we sell is not a southern highbush at all. It's called Pink Lemonade. The last one we recommend, that is. And it is a rabbit eye hybrid. And rabbit eyes tend to get real tall. You can see that it's going straight up. A little different leaf, skinnier leaves. This thing blooms real late, has no guy to pollinate with. Of course, it still makes berries, but they're not real big, probably because of that. They're medium-sized berries, and they don't ripen blue. They ripen kind of rose-colored.
So hence the name,
They still taste quite good. I don't know. I've never found a blueberry that tastes bad. They all taste good. All better than what you can buy in the supermarket. The interesting thing about this one, and the reason we sell it too, is not only for the season, which is July into August, is that the birds don't figure it out for a long time. Because all the other blueberries go through a pink stage before they turn blue, and then the birds eat them. This thing never turns blue, so you're out there picking them, and the birds are waiting for it to turn blue. At the very end of the season, I think they finally figured out that it doesn't turn blue. But early on, you got they got these pink blueberries to yourself because the birds don't touch them for a long time. So kind of neat that way. So that's the pink lemonade. Now you might come across some other blueberries. I mean, they're making a lot of new ones all the time. The problem we have is that all the new stuff from University of Florida, we're not allowed to get. It's only people in Florida are allowed to buy that stuff. Emerald is one of them, but I guess our Oregon grower hasn't just kind of sneaked it out of there, so they sell it to us. But I can't buy this from Florida. They won't. They're not supposed to sell emerald to us. And they have a lot of new ones we'd like to get. So hopefully within the next, usually it's exclusivity for like a decade, and then we get other stuff. Like we were getting Windsor, Millennium for a while, and then suddenly University of Florida says, heck, we're not going to sell these to other states, so they won't sell us those anymore, because we used to get Windsor, Millennium, and a few others of the new ones around 2005 or so, and then suddenly they changed their policy. So they're getting a little stingy now. So there'll be more out. Hopefully in the future we'll have more varieties. Now in the past we've grown quite a few. One from Georgia called Georgia Gem has always done well for us. We do have a few O'Neills left. So O'Neill, which is actually from New Jersey, they're not sure what how to categorize it. They say it's either the northernmost southern highbush blueberry or the southernmost northern highbush blueberry. It needs 300 hours of chill. So this year was the first year it made a crop in about 6 or 7 years. But back in the 80s, this was our best seller because their flavor was incredibly good, big size, great flavor. In the 80s, late 80s, throughout the 90s, we had 300 hours of chill. Even 2000, all throughout the 2000s, they produced pretty well. I would say not quite as well as the 90s or the late 80s, but they were still productive, and suddenly they just tailed off. He said, okay, can't grow this one anymore. The winters have gotten too warm, and we started doing these more than that one. But this year we had the 300 hours. First time we've seen a good crop on them, and they are still really delicious blueberries. But a warning now, we don't know what the climate's going to do. We've seen these same cycles. So the late 70s, early 80s, hot winters. The late 80s, really, really cold winters. And then the 90s were moderate. 2000s were moderate to about 2010. Then it gradually warmed up on us. So we might see it go back to real cool winters again. Then O'Neill would be our choice again. Jubilee has been recommended as a low chill blueberry, but it's from Mississippi. Mississippi, if you've ever been there, is a lot colder than Florida. And this thing missed, when we had that 5 years of really warm winters, this missed 2 of those years. But it's fruited decently recently. And it is, even though in most textbooks it's considered really, really early, here it's late because we don't have the chill. So our chill, I would say this is more or less June, July. So if you wanted something later, Jubilee can fit even though it's not rated as, I mean, in Dave Wilson's catalog, they rated the earliest blueberry, not here. It's real late here because it needs some more chill. So we have a few Jubilees around. O'Neill's I have somewhere. And generally, if we have a cool winter like we just had, they all bloom at the same time. But if we don't, then they're kind of spread out, same as when they produce. So figure that. Any other questions today? Now, just so you know, a 24-inch box would take about between 3 and 4 bags to fill it. 15 gallons, about 1.5 bags of acid mix. This is a 20-gallon, would probably take more than 2 bags to fill that. Usually, if you start with the 1 gallon, you can put them in a 5-gallon. You can fill 2.5, 5 gallons with 1 of our bags of acid mix. And I will tell you, if you're not aware of it, our suppliers just raised all our costs on our products by 25%. Second time in the last 2 years they've done that. So the price, we put $1 higher on the price, but we're making less money on them now. So.
So my plants are planted in the bark right now, and they've been in there a couple years, and now they're not doing very well, so you proved your point. So just take them out, shake everything off, and come right in and plant them.
Yeah, wait till they go dormant this winter. I've never transferred a blueberry from bad soil to good soil, so I don't know how easy it is. Some plants we never seem to ever lose. Like we did thousands and thousands of citrus into better soil and never lost a single one. Gardenias, on the other hand, we tend to lose 2/3 of them when we change them from bad soil to good soil. They don't like the transition. They don't like the fooling with the roots. I don't know how sensitive blueberries are. So,
Maybe leave stuff around the roots, or maybe try to break it out.
well, wash off as much. Sometimes you take them out of there and there's nothing left. There's this, in a pot this big, there might be that much root left, and everything else just falls off. So you can take a hose and blast away and see what you have left. Now, blueberry roots, you can't tell if they're alive or not. They're like little brown hairs. They're really skinny. Whereas on citrus, it's easy. They're fairly fat, white roots, kind of cream-colored roots, and if they're dead, they're slimy. Whereas on blueberries, it's really hard to tell what's a living root and what's not. But just try it and see how you do with them.
Like a pot you're holding there, I think it's about the size I have. If I were to keep them well watered and fertilized, I could get really big plants in those, or not recommended.
Well, bigger than the pot than they should be in this size pot. I mean, I would say in this size pot, 3 by 3 is about max, so you don't let them dry up.
I have mine in your acid mix, and they all did very well this last year. So,
Very good, thank you. Thank you. Any other questions?
What happened to Bountiful? Is it still around?
Well, Bountiful Blue is grown by another grower, and I'm pretty sure it's still out there.
I haven't seen it the last couple of years.
Yeah.
I've got 3 sunshine.
Yeah, of course that one's not grown in our soil, so I don't know. I don't know much about it because I don't use that grower anymore. So, but I haven't really heard of this that it's better than the South Moon. South Moon is still the best we've eaten.
The reason I like with that is because the containers and you get a small area than some of the others. Although I did buy one year and two of them, I don't know what I'm going to do with that. I bought one of those little things you had, and I put it in the 14-inch bottle. And I got it, 3 months ago? 2 months ago when you first brought them out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in your acid mix. That thing just got crazy.
Good, good. Now in 1 month, well, about 7 weeks, and in November, one of my suppliers is bringing out, I think, 3 new blueberries. And I don't think I wrote down here which ones they're bringing us, but they may or may not produce well. That's the only thing. Being up north, they don't know. They don't know what the reaction will be to a low chill. So they just said, try these and see what you get. See if I can find the names on here. No, they're not listed yet. This is, even though this is a new catalog, doesn't have the newest varieties in it. So anyway, we'll if you get our newsletters, we'll have them listed when they arrive. So three. I think it's at least 3 more, might be 4 more. Because he was telling me, just try this one too. Try this. He kept on telling me, try this one. We got to see if it grows down here. So they were developed, I think, in Oregon. I'm pretty sure it's Oregon. So, okay. Now,
I'm sorry, she has, they're like 7 feet tall and full head. Okay, so they're obviously the northern highbush. But you said they're mostly for commercial growers. Is there a reason people don't usually grow those? Because I was gonna tell her why they're commercial grower.
that we don't get the northern highbush?
No, that why, you said that that one's normally a commercial grower that uses this, right? But she has them in her yard, and why would you, commercial grower have them normally in homeowners' kitchen?
Well, commercial growers look for a different, they don't look for flavor necessarily. They look for other things like how easy they are to pick, because most of them shake the bushes to pick them, and how, if they develop a scar, so they, they want so that after they pick them, they're not damaged. So they're looking for something totally different. They're not looking necessarily for flavor. Like South Moon's not grown at all, just because it doesn't, the plant's not as hardy. It may have some defects as far as marketing and storage and all that goes. But homeowner-wise, we always look for best taste, best production next. Okay, all right, thank you.
Good class, thank